Welcome back to the Ed Show. Thanks for watching tonight. Today, House Speaker John Boehner showed that deceit in politics and protecting big oil companies are as more important to him than protecting the American people. I mean, it all started when it seemed like he was open to the idea of eliminating tax subsidies for oil companies. Here it is.
I mean, we saw I'm sure you saw that the former CEO of Shell Oil came out and said that the company, they don't need these subsidies.
I don't think the big oil companies need to have the oil depletion allowances. But for small, independent oil and gas producers, if they didn't have this, there'd be even less exploration in America than there is today.
So would you be in favor of seeing some of these subsidies that are going to big oil at times of record profits?
It's certainly something that we ought to be looking at.
Of doing away with these subsidies?
We certainly ought to take a look at it.
I mean,
we're at a time when the federal government's short on revenues. We need to control spending, but we need to have revenues to keep the government moving, and they ought to be paying their fair share.
Well, the president's proposed doing away with eight different subsidies. This would be about $4 billion a year. You think that's worth doing?
I think we ought to take a look at it.
Wow! Was that John Boehner? The Speaker of the House, a dude from Ohio? We got to take a look at it. Ought to take a look at it. We'll take a look at it. Really, he says? Are we going to do that? Well, not really. An overwhelming endorsement, would you think? Huh? Here comes the backpedal from Boehner's dudes in his communication office. The Speaker made clear in the interview that raising taxes was a non-starter. And he's told the president that. He simply wasn't going to take the bait and fall into the trap of defending big oil companies. He what? He wasn't going to take the bait? That's because, in reality, John Boehner defends the big oil companies. How do I know? Because on March 1st, he voted against ending subsidies for big oil. And, big oil keeps reaping in the rewards. Let's look at the profit chart. Profits. Here it is. Expected first quarter profits 2011. It's only $18.2 billion. And what the hell? It's only a 40% increase from this time last year. They're not doing too well, are they? That's just ExxonMobil, Chevron, ConocoPhillips. Come on. It's just a few of them. The rise in gas prices over the same period, 53 cents a gallon. You feeling it at the pump? Up 53 cents in 3 months. Now let's get back to those taxpayer subsidies for big oil if we can. $4 billion a year. Subsidies. That means your tax dollars going to these people to make money more than anybody else on the face of the earth. You think the oil companies really need $4 billion a year in gifts from you, the taxpayer, when they're making $18 billion in just the first 3 months of this year? Didn't John Boehner say on the House floor, hell no? And the Americans agree. Americans across the country agree. 74% of Americans, you and me, think that it's acceptable to eliminate the tax credits for oil companies. 74%. You know what? Have you noticed lately that liberals are in the 70s and 80s a lot? But hey, Speaker Boehner and the Republicans, well, they want big oil to keep those tax subsidies. Why? Because you just heard in that interview with John Carl from ABC that, wow, that would slow down drilling in the Gulf. What does that mean? You mean you've got a guarantee that if we eliminate the $4 billion that they're going to stop drilling in America? And when Boehner goes on TV and lies about his willingness to be flexible on the issue, he has to walk that back, way back. And it just shows just how afraid Republicans are to tell the truth, that they love the support they're giving to big oil in the form of your tax dollars known as subsidies. Let me tell you something. When Boehner was asked about President Obama's re-election changes, he said this.
The economy doesn't get better. I don't think you win. If people don't feel better about government-run health care, I don't think you win. And if gas prices are $5 or $6, he certainly isn't going to win.
Now get this. You have the Speaker of the House, the most powerful Democrat in our government, and he is almost rooting for failure for the man in the Oval Office because he doesn't see politically the same way as this man. There are middle-class families out there across America who are trying to navigate through their local gas station and make their budgets work week after week. And Boehner says, well, I don't know, he's probably not going to get reelected because of that. Instead of saying, you know what? No matter who the next president is, Middle-class Americans can't afford this, and this is going to hurt our economy, and this is going to lead to another job slowdown. Why wouldn't Boehner think like that? Boehner's not going to think like that because he doesn't have to. He's got the country club crowd behind him. He's got the oil companies behind him. He's got Citizens United behind him. The last thing he cares about is you, Mr. and Mrs. Middle Class. He'd rather giggle about, well, I don't know if he's going to get reelected or not. I'll have another beer. You know, that's where Boehner is. Instead of having the anguish of being the top Republican in America who could do something to help the middle class. Do you think that they have your interest at heart? Hell no, they don't. But President Obama and the Democrats, to their credit, have jumped all over Boehner's original comments about oil subsidies. President Obama wrote a letter to congressional leaders calling on them to immediately eliminate the $4 billion in subsidies. It's the right call, but they're not going to do it. And, of course, that hasn't really warmed too well to Boehner's heart whatsoever. So we got some big issues in America, don't we? So was Boehner lying? Let's bring in co-host of the nationally syndicated show, America's Morning News, Amy Holmes. Amy, good to have you with us tonight.
Great to be here.
Boehner's aides basically admitted that, well, what he said in that interview he really didn't mean. He just didn't want to get caught between a rock and a hard spot defending big oil. Do you accept that?
A politician answering off the cuff something that he may not mean upon reflection. Is that a big surprise? You're clearly, Ed, you're on fire on this issue, but not oil or coal-powered fire. I think what John Boehner's folks were saying is like, look, this has to be an even playing field. You talk about these subsidies for oil. Well, the Joint Committee on Taxation finds that on average, wind, solar, and ethanol gets $12.5 billion in tax consideration. So when you're looking at the competition for energy and for consumers, I think they're talking about having an even playing field, and I would like to see Democrats jump all over gas prices
$18 billion.
Oil companies.
Hold on a second. Would you admit that the ethanol producers and the wind producers and the solar producers, they're not making $18 billion per quarter? Do you think that they really need these subsidies? And did the speaker just maybe make a political mistake there? What do you think?
Well, I would concede that they're probably not making the same profits because people don't want their products as much as they want oil. Oil is what fuels our economy. But you know what? As a man of the left, I would think that you would be very concerned about these subsidies for ethanol because it's leading to higher food prices,
Amy,
higher food prices all around the country.
Amy, this is apples and oranges.
No, we're talking about the energy market.
Okay, let me ask you this. You can't filibuster me. I'm not going to let you. I'm going to ask you a question and turning it back on ethanol or me. I'm not the story. I didn't say that. John Boehner said that to ABC News. And I need to know what you think about the Republicans actually cutting the subsidies. Your thoughts?
My thought is if you cut these subsidies for oil, oil companies will pass some of that onto the consumer. Your gas prices will go up. I'd like to see Republicans and Democrats actually tackle gas prices instead of pointing fingers and blame that is not going to actually address this issue.
So you think we should give them these subsidies because we're afraid the prices are going to go up? Basically, the American people are being held hostage by these oil companies?
I don't think that any of these energy companies, whether it's wind, solar, ethanol, or oil or coal, should be getting any subsidies. And I think actually John Boehner's instinct was that of a conservative that supports free markets, not government welfare. So let me take it a step further.
Do you think the Republican Party would go on board to end all subsidies throughout the entire energy sector? Do you think they'd go along with that?
If it was across the board, I think you'd have a real conversation there. But again, we want to be lowering gas prices for the consumers. And if we don't,
sure do.
That's not just a political problem. That's a problem for you and me and everyone watching the show. We're talking about groceries. We're talking about filling up your car to get to work. I would advise both parties to be looking at that and possibly say a gas tax holiday to try to bring those prices down. No,
that's a gimmick. I'm talking about $4 billion into the Treasury. Either the Republicans are serious about this or Boehner's lying to the country. Amy, good to have you with us tonight. Thank you for your take.
Thank you.
Let's turn now to the host of the nationally syndicated Ring of Fire radio show, Mike Papantonio. Mike, gosh, did we get an ounce of truth out of John Boehner there? What do you think?
we know how this story is going to end. Listen, look at the history of John Boehner. This is a man who was handing out checks as a vote was being taken place on the floor of Congress about whether or not to give the tobacco industry additional subsidies. He was handing out checks from the tobacco industry to other Republican congressmen to convince them that they should continue giving the tobacco industry subsidies. So he was a bag man for the tobacco industry. He's a bag man for the oil industry right now. Look, we haven't caught him physically taking checks or handing out checks. We know what's going on. This isn't a character who focuses on lofty ideas that have to do with moral and social responsibility. This is a guy, interesting thing, we know how he's going to line up because we've seen the history of John Boehner. He has been sent on more international golf junkets by big corporations than any congressman in the history of the U.S. Congress. Now, this tells you, does he care about the consumer or does he care about big corporations? Day one, this is what's interesting about this story, Ed. Day one, he tells millions of Americans on national broadcast that he agrees with them, that it is obscene that we're giving this much money to the oil industry. Day two, when the cameras are turned off, we see him saying, you know, I think it's a good idea we cut Medicare, we cut Social Security, we cut education, and take all these billions of dollars and give it to the oil industry that's making billions of dollars at the pump right now.
I think you got
it
right,
we know
Mike.
John Boehner. We know how this is going to end.
You're spot on. Mike Papantonio, thanks for joining us tonight.